Randy left.
Shut my door.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining our webinar. I'm Shannon, an Extension Agricultural Economist with the Center for Ag Profitability. Today is part of our center's weekly webinar series, which usually happens every Thursday at noon Central. A full schedule is available on our website at cap.unl.edu. Year in and year out, cow-calf producers make decisions related to maintaining the herd and its profitability. Good decisions today make it possible to stay in business and take advantage of future possibilities. One of these choices relates to the retention and/or purchase of replacement cows. So, what is a respectable value of a beef replacement heifer for the coming seasons? Nebraska Extension's beef team and economics team has produced a series of annual forecasts of heifer values. Today's webinar examines a series of break-even values for replacement cows based on productivity, longevity, costs, and expected future values. Joining me today, we have Randy Sainer, a beef systems educator based in Lincoln County. Hi, Randy. And Matt Stockton.
Hello, guys.
And Matt Stockton, hold on. And Matt Stockton, who is a professor and extension agricultural economist with the Center for Ag Profitability. Hey, Matt.
Hi again.
Again, yeah. So, okay. So as we stated, we're going to talk about heifer replacement costs. My name is Shannon San. We are joined with Matt Stockton and Randy Sainer. We represent the beef team as well as the Center for Ag Profitability. And we're going to talk about some exciting forecasts that we have, well, really mostly Matt has developed, but we have helped a little bit. So, yeah.
And that's our Yeah, there's our contact information on this first slide. We'll go to the next one. Okay. So replacement heifer value break even, break even value. These values are based on authors all of us making subjective adjustments.
Yes.
Kansas, FAPRI, and Nebraska beef producer information. It's representing Nebraska cow-calf production costs. So we actually use Nebraska cost in this. Revenues are based on FAPRI, which is out of the University of Missouri, cow-calf forecast for the next 11 seasons. They do a long-term evaluation. Cows are no older than 12 years of age in this program.
Okay, I might mention, Randy, really quick, is that our forecast is not for 11 years. Our forecast is in considering 11 years of information, but it's only good for this year based on FAPRI's information. Sorry.
Thanks, Matt. That's correct. Okay. So what information is used in this? Annual consistent replacement rates of 14, 20, and 28%. We use these. These are kind of averages that we see in the industry. There's 3 estimates, levels of cost. And to do these costs, we put beef producers' information in the cow-calf cost calculator and looked at high, medium, and low, but their actual costs from a producer. And then also we use historical information on cow-calf productivity from the Goodmanson Sandhill Lab herd in Whitman. So we've got actual data that we go back to there. And then we use FAPRI cattle tax information to create our localized prices and indices. May I add, or Shannon?
Okay, so we're going to talk about this, how it all fits together, and that'll help you understand why the information we used is this information. Because we're talking because we're talking 10 years in the future. Shannon, how are we supposed to overcome that? What was the deal there?
Well, the thing with the 10 years in the future is we're doing our best. That's what I say with that.
Right. So, and the best forecast we have is that FAPRI has a macroeconomic model that considers the whole ag sector. They use it all together and they come up with these forecasts and numbers.
Yeah.
So how we use this information, and we've kind of talked a little bit about that, but it's a lifelike simulation in that we use biological data from the Goodman and Santos Ag Lab cow herd and how their cows perform. Okay. We also look at markets and marketing, and then of course the business things of, what's the long-term outlook? How is inflation affecting prices? All those kind of things. Matt, do you want to add to that, or Shannon?
I can add a thought. Is it okay? So what we're trying to do is it on a ranch? What do? You buy cows, they produce for a period of time, hopefully a long time. Hopefully they're very productive, and then you sell cows. And when you have those cows, when they're productive, you are basically selling the calves and trying to make money on the calves. At least we're talking about calf producers. And so basically we recreated this whole thing. We created having cows. Their size is based on the biological information, how the calves grow as large as they are at weaning for the typical weaning system. The calving rate is important in this. We're not going to talk about that today, but with that information's in there. Pregnancy rate is in there. All that kind of information, biological information, is in it. So it's a dynamic herd that's basically a computer herd rather than having real cows. We draw from this herd, and then we use culling rates to determine how long and how many cows stay, just like you would in a regular herd. And so that's the lifelike simulation. I think, Randy, you're going to give an example.
So let's say you bought, 1,000 heifers. We know that some heifers probably won't breed the first year. Those heifers, you've already paid for them, and you're going to sell them open. That you may have paid $3,000, you may get $1,000 for them when you sell them. So you've really lost. You got the calf, right? So you got a little bit of income, but that rest that the calf didn't make up, which may be $20 or $30, or it could be $100. The rest of that's a loss, and that loss has to go on those other 999 head of heifers. And so as we go down through the years, we're having to call cows out. Every time we do that, that cow's value that she has left that she's not paid back herself goes on the other cows. And that's kind of how this system works. As we all know, those cows that are older in our herd have stayed with us longer. We've got more dollars from their calves because we got more calves out of them. Matt, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's optimistic, Perfect. Randy. And yes, that's assuming that you make money. But in other words, assuming your costs are less than your revenues on an annual basis. The thing you got to realize is if you have a negative, if your revenue is smaller than your cost, that cow actually contributes a loss to herself.
Right. So if it's a negative year, that also gets added in later on.
Again, and those cumulative years make a difference on how much the cow pays. So in other words, how long it takes the cow to pay herself back. And basically that's the break evens we're doing, is we're basically going through and say, okay, how long or how much money does it take to break even if I paid this much money for the cow and the markets are as we say they're going to be, and this cow produces calves, and they can be heifers or bulls, and they're priced accordingly. We have a price slide in there. We also have for size, and we also have the gender difference in cost. Revenue, sorry. So in other words, it's basically all created so that a cow has a 50-50 chance every time of having a heifer or bull. And all these things are all in this model, all going together. And also the size of the cow when she's a 2-year-old is going to be different than when she's a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. And that's reflected, and that's where the biological information comes in. She should also produce a larger calf as she gets older. So if she gets culled when she's a 2-year-old, she never gets to produce that optimal weight
calf at 5 or 6 or 7. Yeah.
And so all those things are considered in this model.
Very good. I think we've explained that well. So this is just a picture of the slide. And this just kind of shows, now in this case, they didn't have a bad year, which is kind of unlikely. There was no negatives, but you can see as the cow gets older, the average break-even price for her increases because she's been in the herd longer, producing more calves, making you money. And there's probably a period of time where that starts to decrease. But anyway, those are the kind of things. And I've got one more slide to show.
Before you go on, Randy.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I didn't catch you in time. Sorry.
That's okay. Do you want to go back to the other
Please-
slide? I can go back.
Please, could you do
Okay.
that?
Yep, I can.
Okay, so if you look over in the column where it says percent, it tells you what percent of your herd is of a specific age at this particular or made it to that specific age and what they do. And these are the break evens for each. So in other words, if I had a cow and she's a 2-year-old, I could only pay $1,200 for her if she never lived longer, if I sold her back at the call rate and the calf prices that we have. So 28% of your herd did that. Well, 15% of your herd used the next are 3-year-olds, and they accumulated an extra $100 compared to, so you could have paid almost $150 more for those. So by the time you get down to the end, this particular cow, had she lived to be a 12-year-old, you could have paid $2,282 for her and paid for her and broke even. So some cows aren't making it and some cows are. And what's happening is we take the average of the weighted average of those based on what percent they are in the herd. And that tells you what you could pay on average for a cow.
This just shows some of the inputs, man. If you want to explain that a little bit, you're welcome to.
Okay, so basically, if you look at the columns over there and you have high and low, and so basically that gives you the high and the low cost annually. So in other words, there's a range in there, and that range can exist in there because in other words, you don't always have the same cost, and we want to cover a range of costs to account for risk. So that's in there, and there's a bunch of other these numbers. And then, of course, you have herd composition and all these different things. This is all just information that goes into the model. But you can see how it changes from year to year and how it varies from year to year just from the slide. I don't think there's anything else there.
Okay. So, critically important factors with purchasing heifers is the heifer's ability to stay in the herd, right? Because we want her to be in there a long time, longevity. And then the other two things are current and future expected differences between costs, which, we've seen a lot of cost rises in cost with the drought and stuff this past year for hay and feed. Okay. And that's going to vary depending on the year. Actually, we see hay prices lower this year, so that cost will be different. We also see prices for calves a little higher this year, so that's going to benefit you some. So all those are figured in there, as well as, the cattle cycle and how it's going up in price or if it's going down in price. Anything you guys want to add to that?
Shannon?
No, I think Randy got most of it. So.
Well, okay. I just thought maybe, you
else,
had
Matt?
something to say about why longevity might be important. And I know.
Well, I mean, longevity is important because assuming we have like positive years, I was like, it helps with the net return of the animal long term, right?
Right.
So yeah,
So,
and I was like,
so your call rate is generally has a positive effect on the herd, right?
yes, absolutely.
Unless you're losing money every year, then it would not.
Well, that's why I said I'm
if you're losing
assuming we
every
make
year,
money.
you probably don't want to have a herd. That
Right.
would be the indication that I would say is that, okay, having cows costs me money. I don't think it's a good idea to have them.
Okay.
But we're not talking about that.
Okay, so this is our break-even scenario using Nebraska prices and feed cost. Okay, so we have the higher call rate here to the left. I'm circling. I think you can see me circling it with my little marker here. So the low cost we could pay $1,075 for it, but only $587. In most cases, you're not going to be able to get a heifer for $587. So if you're in this group here, probably we need to think about some management changes to try to help us, reduce either calling rate or reduce cost, right? Because these are high cost, high calling rate. And
okay. So can I say something, Randy, when you're done?
Yep, I'm ready for you.
Okay. So, what we did is we replicated this 25,000 times for each one of these scenarios. So we had 25,000 different cows drawn, and we took the average over those 25,000, and this is the average outcome. And so what we're saying here is that 25,000 times you could afford on average to only pay $1,075 if you have low cost and the high cull rate, which was 28%. which means that every year you're putting 28% of your herd is being replaced by 2-year-olds. So what it means is you don't have a lot of older cows. You have a lot of younger cows. Now, your herd may not be that way, and we can talk about that later because the herd's different. We had different scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that works. So when you break even, so if you have a 14% call rate, and Randy's going to show you a slide here in a minute that I think is kind of cool about ages, about the difference of the herd and ages, which is kind of nice. But when you look at it, also, what is the current cost of a heifer? I mean, we're assuming certain cost here, which is the $931, the $1,000, and $1,080. So if you got a cost that's lower than this, chances are that means if you have a herd that's like only 14%, you're going to be able to
You could spend more.
pay more money, right,
You
Shannon?
can buy, spend more money.
And so what happens, Shannon, when you do the if like let's say you have a higher cost?
You can't spend as much.
That's
An
right.
easy answer.
Because
Plus,
you're
like,
not
to
going to
be
be able to break
honest-
even. In other words, if you have higher
Yeah.
costs than what we're saying, you're going to be in a worse situation, and you can only pay so much for your animal, and that's
Yeah,
the thing to consider.
and
We'll
it's-
talk. Sorry, go
It's
ahead.
really small increment changes to the cost make quite a large difference in terms of what you can spend on a replacement heifer too. So
And it shows the importance of both cost and of course returns
And
also, because
revenue, yeah,
those younger cows are going to have smaller calves, right? If you got a younger herd, because we see about age 6 is when we get the maximum weights on calves.
Absolutely. So that's one part of the biology. The other part is every time you replace a cow, if you're buying her at a bred price and selling at a utility price,
yeah,
you got to make up
that's more.
that huge, and she's got a shorter life to be depreciated over.
Right.
So
Right.
that depreciation cost becomes larger relative to the rest. So it can be a problem. So culling rates really contribute a lot to what you're able to pay for an animal. And also it's kind of intuitive. It says the longer an animal lasts, the more
money
you
it
pay
makes.
for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So,
absolutely.
and this would be a commercial herd. A registered herd would be a little different because we're trying to change the genetics faster.
Yeah.
So just remember that. Okay.
Well, you're also
Yeah.
going to be if you're a stock supplier, you're going to want to hopefully get more than market value for your
Right.
bred animals. You're not selling a commercial animal. You're selling something that's got something special about it, and so it would be a completely different
Right. Scenario.
analysis.
So here is average cow herd age, and you can see it pretty well, Matt. 4, 5, and 6. So the 14% is you have 6-year-old average cows. The middle age you have 5, and the younger you only have average age of 4. So you can see the difference it would make in size of calves, and those kind of factors.
Well, and the number of animals you have to purchase every year versus the number of animals you sell every year. So in other words, you're changing your revenue proportion. When you cull a lot of animals, your revenue comes not only from calves, it comes from cows, but the problem is you also have to replace those cows by buying them or raising them, whatever. And so you've got that ratio that really doesn't work well for you.
So we're going to go here. These are break-even tables. So let's say you don't have a 14% culling rate, your rate's 15%. This will give you those numbers. So like we have a 14% and we have a 15% here for the low group. Right in here, you can see you got to pay a little more because you have a higher culling rate, right?
Yeah, it shows you for every 1% change in culling rate, that's how much it's going to drop at a certain cost level. Each cost level is a little different, right?
Right.
So in other words, if you've got like a high cost, so you're way down here at $1,069.71, right? And you went from you're saying, well, you can pay $773 for replacement. But with a 1% increase in culling rate, you could basically lose $10 off of that. You can only pay $763 to break even. Now we're talking about to break even on average for those cows.
Which break even means you're paying for the cow. She paid for herself, right?
She basically, in other words, it was a wash. You basically got enough revenue to stay in business, be in business, pay for the cow, and then have a return over the cost of keeping cows and feeding them and doing all the things that you do with them, vaccinations and everything else. And included in there, depending on if you have this in your cost or not, which you can, is how much is it going to, how much do you need from each cow to withdraw to maintain a living? That should be part of your cost. So in other words, if indeed you're paying $900 for cows that only average break even is $754 or something, you're going to go, okay, so $150 has got to come from somewhere, and it doesn't come from thin air. Okay. So basically you're going to be losing $150 a head for every one of those cows that you purchased that year. If indeed if they average out to be that number. Now there's differences in that and all that, but now some people will buy a cow. Well, I paid $2,000 and that cow made me money back. Yeah, she can, because remember when in the beginning, the first slide we showed that there was a cow that was 11 or 12 years old, and you could have paid over $2,000 for her.
Yeah, she was almost 23, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that cow, yeah, you made money, but what about the one that didn't even have a calf? Because there's death loss in there too. And then you have to carry, that has to be carried as part of the cost. In other words, if you buy 100 cows and 2 die, so you paid $1,000 each. Well, now those cows, you actually paid more than $1,000 each for those cows, because you got $2,000 more. You paid 100. You paid whatever you paid.
Right. You got to add that cost onto the rest of the cows.
Rest of the herd, yeah.
Right.
Rest of the animals,
basically.
Right. And then some cows have all male calves, and they grow like crazy, and they're big, and they may make more money. So you might be able to pay more for them. But this is based on, 500, I think 25 or 35 pound calf on average. It's based on the biology of having cows of, I think it was 1,151 pounds, I think was the average cow size of the herd for Gudmundsson. And it's based on selling calves of that size based on a cost structure that we have. And so it's your cost and your revenue that are key to how much you can pay. So in other words, if I could lower my cost to $700, and that included money for me, I could pay a whole lot more for a cow if I have for any of these cull rates.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely.
There. Okay, this is by the higher culling rates. So you can see as you get higher culling rates, even with low cost,
not very much.
No, you can't pay a lot.
Can't spend a whole lot then, yeah, unfortunately.
So, but this will kind of give you an idea for the different ones. Okay.
But the difference between the lowest value at 28% and the high cost, which is a $587, right?
And 1,075, that's almost double.
It's almost 3 times that value if you have low culling rate and low cost.
Yep.
Yeah, because it's 15.
So if you have a low cost operation, but you have a high culling rate, it hurts you. So in other words, let's say, well, man, I can cut my costs and maybe you don't rebreed as money, or you don't do this, you don't do that. Then you could end up with like only $1,000. But if you could somehow figure out how to make that work and keep the productivity up as far as, rebreeding or whatever you need to keep your pregnancy rates and your calving rates high, and do that at a minimum cost or low cost, you'll end up with a lot more money you can afford to buy a cow for. Now, did you have a probability? Never mind, Randy.
Yeah, it's in here.
Our next slide. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, actually, I was thinking, Shannon, would you like to introduce this one?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about this. So basically from FAPRI, the estimation is that the heifer is going to cost about $1,940. I'm just going to round up and say 2,000. It's like, just to make math easier on me. But so basically it's looking at the probability of paying off the expected head costs. So, or the dollars per head based on the cost of the animal. So if you are the low cost producer, basically, and you have a 14% culling rate, chances of you paying off that $1,940 animal, and let's be realistic and look at like prices right now. I've seen them for like 2,400. Randy was saying he heard some for 3,000. Is that right?
Yes.
So it's like, it is one of those things, right? So assuming you can get one for like 1940, maybe. I was like, and you're, like a low cost producer, I was like, and you have a lower cost culling rate, you have a much higher probability of being able to pay it off. Because I mean, think about it. There's a lot of variability in like the ranching operations in general. There's drought, there's all kinds of weather stuff. I know people that like, we've had invasive species come in that have just never existed in those areas. And unfortunately it's poisonous to the animals. So they die. It does happen. So again, all of this is just the probability, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically the probability of paying off that replacement animal.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah.
So what and I think Shannon said it beautifully, is that what we're saying here is that, okay, 35.3% of the time, if everything goes to say we said it was going to go, prices and everything, and calf size and all this stuff that we said is true, and all these things are true, I have a 35% chance of paying that note back. Or not note, I'm sorry, because we didn't borrow any money in this case.
We didn't borrow money. We should tell them that, though. We did not borrow money.
We did
assume
not
we're cash
borrow any
flowing.
money. You borrow money, this doesn't look this good. It looks not so good. It looks worse. The more money you borrow, the less you can pay for animals, because you have to pay interest on that animal. And there's a bunch of stuff there we haven't talked about. But so I got a 35.3%. So in other words, if I bought 100 animals, I'm going to 35.3 will live long enough
to pay it back,
to pay for themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. That's basically what we're saying. So in the case of the high cost, you really haven't got it. I mean, that's less than at the high culling rate, so less than
1%.
8 out of 1,000 animals. Well, actually, that's a percent. I mean, that's less
That's
than
like
8
a
out of
piece of an
10,000
animal.
animals are gonna pay for themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm going to gamble on that. I'm not thinking that's a good gamble, but I don't know how you feel about it. But less than, because it's like 0.008. It's not even 1%. 1% would be like 1 out of 100. So in the case of the mid cost and the high culling rate, 1 out of 100 animals will end up paying for themselves. And so, I mean, you buy 100 animals, you got one that paid for itself, and that's not really a high margin, in my opinion.
No, and there's only like a $70 difference between the low and the medium for the cost.
So, I mean, you're right there on
it's
the
those
edge.
little things. Yeah.
But you got a 12%. If you can reduce your costs, 12 of those animals out of 100 will pay for themselves. So, I mean, given the scenarios that we're talking about, so it's kind of, it kind of gives you an idea. So if you can lower your cost and keep your call rate low, you could have a higher percentage of the animals paying for themselves, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Randy?
I think we've said it, and your prices are going to all be different. So
absolutely,
we
if
know
somebody's
that,
got a $730 cost, that's going to look a lot better than these. So
and a few years ago we had like an $850 cost for the low, and guess what? We could spend like quite a bit more money on heifers. The challenge is feed costs really went up this last year because of the drought. But there's some advantages, because this year we feel like hay prices are lower, corn prices are lower, so there is going to be some improvement in revenue this year. So every
prices
year
are
like
still up.
that. What's that?
I said, and prices are still up. So
yeah, and prices
are
up, which will help. But the problem is those years where you have high feed costs at no price. Thank God we had a good price this year, because a lot of producers in the Midwest spent more money on feed because it was cold in the winter and we had a drought before.
Yeah, where people's, only fed like a pound or two, they were feeding 3 to 5, I'm sure. So,
okay. So the thing I'm sorry, are you done, Randy? I didn't mean to.
Well, I was just going to say, and the difference in preg rates is what we're seeing is those that fed a pound a day versus maybe 4 or 5 because of the cold weather. We're seeing like 8% open versus 25. So some years you have the higher culling rate if you don't adjust your management. So management's really important in all this too.
Well, your costs and your cull rates are highly related. So it's really takes
Absolutely.
a lot of knowledge and expertise to get
And
it
balance. Balance, right?
Yeah.
Balancing the two is really important.
Balance. I'd say balance. The thing I would also say is, okay, so how do I think about this if I'm a producer? So if I'm a producer and I'm thinking about cost, I'm thinking about culling rate, I'm thinking about all these things, I go, okay, these things are based on the next 10 to 11 years of what's going to happen in the cattle market and what's going to happen to your cost. So if let's say you're a guy that's got a pretty good handle on cost and you've got a really low cost, and you're saying, my costs aren't even anywhere near that high. Well, that's great, because what it means is that if you would believe the FAPRI scenario or the next 10 years of what they're saying, or you've got an idea that, hey, I can pay more for my heifers than the $1,500. I can pay, $2,000 and be okay. That might be the case. But if you're a guy that's got a high cost, you're going to go, okay, I got to be careful. I got to be really careful what I buy and how I buy it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy. It just means you're going to have to be really careful. The other thing I would say is that what is your expectation for the future? If you're expecting prices to continue to incline, and really optimistic, then you might be willing to take a chance and say, I can pay a little bit more for heifers than what they're saying. And that you can. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, because who am I to tell you your forecasts are any worse than mine? Because I use FAPRI, so I don't have to take responsibility for my forecast. And there's a reason I do that, is because it's very difficult to forecast any more than even a year in advance is pretty tough. But you got to have that guess on what do you think is going to happen in the cattle market. So if you're at the bottom of the cattle market and the prices are going to go up, and you've got a pretty good control on cost, then you can be optimistic on what you pay for your heifers. But if you think prices are going to drop and you think costs are going to escalate, you better be very careful what you're paying for your animals, because that means you can't pay a lot for your animals, because your cost is going to be different than what we said it was in the model. And so it's not going to turn out to be the same. And your revenues are going to be diminished. So lower revenues, increased costs, means that cow isn't paying herself back. And so when that's not paying herself back, your break even, she's only going to last so long. Cows only last, they only last what they last. They only last, 2 years, 3 years. You don't know. That's the thing, is when you buy a cow, you have no idea. She may walk out in the pasture, lightning strike, and she's gone. I don't, or drink some battery acid or eat a, whatever wild cow killing device. I don't know, something, but she dies. You're going to take a big loss on that, and you don't know that. And that's why we're giving you this number, so that you can kind of make a judgment. Do I believe, because FAPRI believes in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see a drop in cost. And that's helping out, giving a higher value. But they also believe that prices are going to go down a little bit too. So you're going to have to decide, if I think prices are going to be higher than what, and you're certainly welcome to ask for the prices and costs. We'll certainly share them with you, what we used, and so that you can make that judgment. But that's how I'd be thinking about this. I go, if I think that what we're doing is pretty close to what could happen, then you're pretty solid forecast. If I believe that revenues are going to actually be higher because cow numbers are lower and we're really going to have great revenues, I might be a little optimistic and might pay more for those heifers. But remember, you're taking that risk on about that price. You're taking that price risk on when you're paying for your heifer or your.
The other thing you could use too, Matt, is if you're raising your own replacements, what is your cost?
Exactly.
And so you might be able to produce them cheaper. You might be able to buy them cheaper. But again, those cows still have to pay off. And if your cost is $1,500, that's what we say is break even, then you're probably okay. But let's say your replacements are costing you $2,000 and you might be able to buy some for $1,700.
Yeah.
You might consider looking at that in a sense from a cost and revenue standpoint.
Absolutely. And that's why you got to take your operation as a system, how is your replacement heifer program? What's it costing you? You need to know that. I mean, if you don't know what an animal's costing you, you don't know whether or not that animal's going to break even or not, or have an idea. Because like, oh, let's say your cost is $1,400 or $1,350 for replacement. Hey, what's the probability if you've got a low call rate? You're going to be almost, you're going to be almost 100% the fact that they're going to pay themselves back.
Yeah.
You're going to be closer.
Right.
I mean, for sure, it's going to be, the probability of success is much higher for each animal being successful and paying themselves off. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah.
So who has questions? I guess we've talked long enough. We would like your questions.
Are you monitoring that, Randy?
I am not.
I am. It's okay. I was like, there was one question, but Ryan already. Oh, can we put current market prices in the tables to see what it would be today?
The only current market price, and unless somebody else wants to answer this, I don't mean to be. I didn't think you guys ran the model, so I wasn't sure that you would know. You can't. Okay, so you could take historical prices and put in there, but the thing is, after this year, because we put in December price. Well, December hasn't happened yet. So what we use is FAPRI's estimate. Actually, if you use the table, just how I went through the table and looked at it. I got prices from CattleFax. I looked at their bred cow prices, if you will, and all the utility price and all this stuff. And I extrapolated, okay, what might that be in December given historical information? And to be truthful, according to what I saw, I think it's close to $2,600, or it's $200. It's a lot of money because, and that's one thing I didn't say. So if you know utility price, on average, historically, it's about if you know utility price from, what is it, South Dakota?
Yeah.
If you have that price from Sioux Falls, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, Sioux Falls. If you have that price, if you multiply that times 2.21 and then times about the average weight of your cows, you'll get an idea what a replacement is valued at. Because historically, that's been pretty close. Now, it's varied everywhere from about 145 to about 267 or something. But on average, it's about 2.21. So that gives you an idea, what to expect. But yes, what I did, though, is I used FAPRI's, what they said was going to happen, put that in, extrapolated what they said, and came up with a bred cow value, okay? Because they give you a utility price. They don't give you a bred cow price in FAPRI. So I used that 2.21, multiplied it times their utility price, and used that to capture that 1,900, 1,009. But you can use current price, but it's only for 1 year. It's only the beginning year. Yeah. So in other words,
that's the challenge.
So in fact, let's say that you said, the current price is $2,400, okay, for a cow. What I would do is that, well, instead of 1940, what's the probability of success? It's going to be a lot lower than the 35%. I can promise you that. Okay, so the probability of breaking even, it doesn't change the break-even value very much. In other words, you still got to pay, because the cow values are in there, what you bought her for. You're going to have to make $400 more somewhere, though. $500, because that's what you paid is the $1,900. So that's going to come out in the wash, and it means that you have to recapture more value. So you can put that in there, and if you're paying more, it means you're going to have to make more on those cows, and the likelihood of you paying for that cow is a lot less.
Lower, yeah.
Assuming that it happens the way FAPRI says.
So Matt, unless you have like a value added, or you have a way that you're increasing the value of those calves, that could help you pay more. Or if you have lower cost, that could help you pay more. Those
right. Or if you believe that that revenues are going to be more than what FAPRI says, then
if you think
be
it's going
able
to be
pay more as well.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So in other words, if you're more optimistic, and if you think if your costs are lower, that means you can also pay more. So that's what you have to think about. So you can look at market prices of animals today, and that's fine. But remember, the model doesn't work on existing data. It works on a forecast. Basically, you're saying, okay, I don't know what the future is. FAPRI came up with a bunch of information that predicts the future for the next 10 years in agriculture. everybody uses it across the United States. I mean, the federal government uses it for its projections as well. And to our knowledge, that was the best we could do to predict how that markets were going to perform and what costs were going to be.
Yeah.
And so that's what we used. Now, if you had a scenario and you wanted to check it out, you're welcome to contact Randy or myself or Shannon, and we could work through that process and give you a forecast of what that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you have a lot more questions. So
yeah, I was going to say,
can I get to the? So I'm sorry,
Yes.
Matt.
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Too long.
No. It was good. It was good. It was needed.
Let's go to the next question, guys.
So,
Come on.
historically speaking, is it typically cheaper to retain your own replacement heifers or purchase bred heifers / cows? I would say it depends on your cost, right, Randy?
Yes, that would be my thought too. Depending on, how you manage them, what kind of culling rates you have, all those things are going to go into that factor. And in some cases, you could probably produce them cheaper than buying them. Other cases, you can probably buy them cheaper than you can produce them.
You gotta, I think you got to ask yourself the question is, okay, the quality of animal that you're expecting when you raise is what you want to look for in the market. And I bet you sometimes it's cheaper to raise them and sometimes it's cheaper to buy them because the market does not pay attention to quality and timing. The cattle markets go up, the cattle markets go down based on supply and demand for the animals. And so you're raising animals regardless of the demand and supply because you have a demand for that animal. And there will be times that it'll be cheaper for you to raise the animal, and there'll be times it'll be cheaper for you to buy that animal. So the answer to the question depends on the year, and it also depends on what your cost structure is. Maybe you're not really good at raising animals and it's really costing you a bundle. And if that's the case, you say on average, if I take historical prices, my animals cost me more than if I had bought them. Now, there may be some other reason to
or depending on where you are. Well, see, I was thinking more like where you are in your business cycle. So like me as a younger producer, like I'm still potentially going to have to work off farm to help supplement some of that until I get to a point where my operation.
Yeah, but
but that's a different thing.
That doesn't change the cost of raising animals. It only changes availability of labor, and that's a consideration. It's a whole nother deal.
Yeah, that's a thing.
In other words, if you have access to cheap feed, and you can raise animals cheaply, and you're willing to give up some of your revenue in the short term, is in the form of heifers that you retain, because if you can't sell them, that's a cost to you. You're lacking, okay? And so you transfer from one business to the other. That you need to actually account for that cost and then account for all the things associated with raising the heifer. You need to have a death loss cost and an opportunity cost on the money that you're not, there's all kinds of things that need to be put in there. And you calculate that out and you look at, okay, is that cheaper or more expensive on average? And if you think that it's cheaper, then I recommend that you do that on average. If it's not, you need to think maybe there's another strategy if you think it's important.
Okay.
Sorry, next question.
No, you're fine. Okay, so do you have a good source to help gauge cow number inventory by state besides USDA NAS January and July report?
That would be my that's probably our best source. I don't know of a really good one. Do you, Matt?
No, the thing is, the NAS is probably the best. There are, you're talking about cow numbers and they have the annual report. I think WASD also has some information on that. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, but I think USDA is going to be your best source, your most neutral source.
Yeah.
You might I don't know if Cattle Facts gives you any.
Maybe.
Yeah,
but they do. I think they do have some information.
Well, a lot of times the Cattle Facts will collect information from USDA sources.
NAS. Yeah. So, okay, what would the model look like if someone purchased a 3-year-old coming with her second calf because of better longevity of that group? Could you pay more? Would the probability of break even improve?
Okay.
I think you talked
it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Okay, because you have an older animal that's proven, but with animals, who knows? Okay, I mean they can still die, they can still not be.
Well, you just said the lightning strike, so that's what I think.
Yeah, right. But there's also so in other words, what you're saying is maybe in your herd, you have a problem with 2-year-olds because you can't get them bred. And so you have a higher cull rate individually. I think that's what we're talking about here. You have that higher cull rate, the 2-year-olds. Buying 3-year-olds might be a strategy to avoid that. But what you may be having a problem with is cow size. And here's why I say that. Larger cows require added nutrition and feeding. And if you don't give it to them, you're going to have a probability of non-pregnancy because they have a bigger body weight. And from what I'm not an animal scientist, and I'm only telling you this from the data that I have, okay? So Randy might comment on it. But the other thing too is you got a 3-year-old now, and she's only got a certain length of a productive life. And, you know, if you can get her for the same price and you think her calf's going to be slightly larger, the thing you have to worry about, though, is longevity. You're taking basically a cow now that's a year older, and so therefore she's going to have a shorter life, especially if I have found from the data that I've seen, and you guys may, you know, you may have a different thing on your ranch and you may have different cows, but the GSL, I wouldn't keep a 12-year-old. It's too much risk. There are some 12-year-olds that do fine, but there are some 12-year-olds that tank. They basically, the calf size is much
smaller.
They have more problems. They have a tendency to, I mean, it's just a real problem. In fact, if you look at some of the data in the animal science literature, it talks about call rates. Call rates increase every year, percentage-wise. They actually get worse. Cows have a tendency to drop off, especially after 6 years. And so when you get into that 10, 11, and 12, you're talking about a risky deal, okay? And so now, instead of a 2-year-old to maybe 12-year-old, you got a 3-year-olds so you're going to have to take into account that loss and what that's going to look like. But if you have a real problem with keeping 2-year-olds in, I would either, number one, consider maybe, okay, is there a nutrition program and paying the extra nutrition and keeping the cows longer if you can and improving that statistic, or look, you can do 3 years old if it may be a short-term thing, but I would be careful because you are shortening the time that cow's going to be in the herd.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And would retaining calves and backgrounding them to 800 pounds plus help bring the cost down potentially?
Okay, my experience with backgrounding is interesting. In fact, retention. Randy, you may have some thoughts on this as well. But my experience is it can work. But you have to have facilities, you have to have the ability, and you have to understand the markets. I would look at alternative times to market and try to market at high points in the market. Try to do things rather than just, okay, I'm going to do this to this month and then I'm going to sell. And you do it the same every year. I think there's opportunities out there to maybe, oh, well, we can sell here, we can do this, we can do that, and taking the opportunity of spikes in the market or opportunities in the market, and also contracting issues. So those are things definitely concerned. I don't think you can say, oh, it works for everybody, but retention can be a way to increase, especially like if you got plenty of grass or you got plenty of resources that maybe don't get used otherwise. I mean, grass is not the same every year. You don't have the same AUMs, right, Randy?
Yes, and the other thing is, cost to gain. If you can keep your cost to gain within reason, that's going to help you. But if it's going to cost you too much, one thing I will say is I just looked at a top 20% profitability group for Finbin. I just did an article on this. And what I saw is those producers that were in that high profitability group, they sold some of their calves, their bigger end, right off the cow, and then they backgrounded some or put some in another system. I don't know if they either backgrounded or put in feedlot. I couldn't tell for sure. But those were the high profitability people. So maybe there's an advantage in taking those smaller ones and growing them up, or the bigger ones, depending on what works for you. That
you have to watch the year. You have to watch the year because there are inverted markets, and I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. We have some pre-feed information where we enlarged our calves and fed them feed, where the older cows, the cows that actually weighed 50 pounds more, sold for less per head.
Yes.
Okay, so just because you put weight on them doesn't mean you're going to make more money on them. Yet generally that's the case. And generally that price slide works normally, but sometimes it gets inverted. So you have to look at the markets and see what you think is going to happen there. So it's not just a biological decision. It's also a a marketing decision based on markets and what you think is going to happen there as well.
And the one I'm talking about is 2022. That's 1 year, right? That's not a long term. And so last year, those producers that did that were in that high profitability group. Okay. The low profitability group, some of those people actually did grow their calves to a bigger weight, but they got less per pound and actually were lower profit than those that had a lower calf selling weight. So you got to be really careful in your costs there, but they can help you, yes.
If you have the resources and you're able to make the transition and you're able to do it, and you're able to do it cheap enough, basically, in other words, if you're good at it, you have a competency there and you can exploit that, I think that's a real benefit. Right. But if it's something that ends up because of the way your operation is set up and that you don't have,
you just don't have the flexibility,
you got to be really careful.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, like adding a yearling operation or having some yearlings, it can help you with drought because you can sell those calves if you got drought, you don't have enough forage. So those kind of systems, those backgrounding or yearling operations can give you some flexibility as a producer. And we're seeing more and more people look into that because of that flexibility, because our weather is changing all the time and we have these droughts. And that's one way to help kind of have a drought plan also.
Yeah. So, okay, we have another question. What do the economics look like across the whole herd when not breeding the heifers until they are 2 and have their first calf when they are 3? They are bigger, have less maintenance requirements for growth, and should have a higher conception rate when breeding. However, 1 less calf in the first year. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is an interesting question. And
it is.
I think that what you got to look at is how much money do you have in that animal versus what you're going to get out of the animal. It's the same question. In other words, if you can raise them to 2 years old for free, it's a great idea.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
Yeah, versus it costs you more money because you got feed into them because, and you're pushing them a little bit. This whole idea, though, is if you look at it, it kind of flies in the face of what's going on in the trends. And the reason is because it would be very difficult to make that as profitable. You're right about, so the gain, what you're saying is, so what am I gaining? I'm gaining a higher rate of pregnancy. Well, I think that when you breed heifers, it's in the high 90s anyway. So I'm not sure that how much you're going to gain there. The second thing is, if the animal has proper nutrition when they're younger, they have a tendency to be ready to breed, and breeding there is some evidence that breeding isn't just a result of age, it's also a result of nutrition. So if you're basically saying we're going to cut nutrition so we can cut some cost, you may be cutting there's some things to do with embryo when they develop fetal programming. There's some evidence that might be a concern. I'm not an expert in that, and I'm not going to talk to that. But those are things that I would investigate further. I think it's a great idea to consider. I think you should pencil it out though and think about, okay, so how much am I really going to gain? How many calves am I really going to gain? And how much does it affect my future cull rate? Because now if the animal's older, maybe they don't get culled as soon. So if it extends their life in the herd, I'm not talking about extends their life in reality, but extends their life in the herd, there could be some benefit to it. But the thing is, how much does it extend their life? And how far does that go? Because dystocia and there's some other things that cause non-pregnancy. It had nothing to do with, whether they're bred at 2 years or a year. There's some other factors in there. So how much are you gaining in pregnancy rates? And then and of course your calves are going to be slightly larger because your cow's slightly older. I mean, all these things are going to happen. But I think that the gain at this point from the science, and the reason we went to the earlier breeding is for the opposite reason, is to actually increase profitability. Because when a cow's sitting around doing nothing, the other thing too is if you're waiting till she's 2 years old, when are you breeding her? I mean, you're going to have to breed her at a time that's not in sync with the rest of the herd, I would think, if you're exactly 2-year-old. Now, if you're waiting that whole year, that's a huge cost too, because now you got all those extra animals for an extra year before they are productive. And the more you carry, the more you're going to have to pay back. So that your gain's going to have to be tremendous to pay back that extra cost.
Okay. All right. So what would crossbreeding be more beneficial than straight breeding?
So I will do some, Matt, than you can. So crossbred calves tend to be a little heavier. You get heterosis if you use the right bulls. I mean, you got to use the bulls that's going to add heterosis, right? You can't use a terrible bull and you get heterosis. But yes, and the other thing, the big benefit is the cow. The crossbred cow will have at least 1 to 2 more calves in her lifetime than a straight bred cow.
Reduce your culling rate.
And so
Yeah,
your culling
that's the
rates
longevity.
improve. That's where I think you can really save money by crossbreeding. Now you can, if you do a terminal cross, you can add a lot of pounds to those calves, like putting a Charolais bull on a black white-faced cow. The black white-faced cow, Hereford Angus cow would have the heterosis, right? So you get extra calf out of her. Plus, you're getting that extra weight out of that terminal sire Charolais bull, or whatever you want to use for a terminal sire. But those calves you would not save for replacements, right? Because they're going to get pretty big. So those are some advantages. But yes, I think crossbreeding can help you and will help you because the data shows at least an extra calf out of that cow in her lifetime.
I'll only make one comment, is that if you look at all the meat industries such as pork and chickens, they could care less about breed. They breed for characteristics and heterosis. And the reason they do that is that they're able to make genetic progress in a way that they can make a heck of a lot more money, and they can be a heck of a lot. They can make changes in the animal, and they get the animals they want. And I'm not saying purebreds are bad, and they're not. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that the benefits from crossbreeding are many. And there are people that have herds of basically where they're crossing all the time. There's a guy that has his own breed of cattle. He's got like 5 different breeds or something, and he puts them in here. He's got a farm. He's got thousands of cattle. Anyway, he does it. Doesn't mean it's right for you. You have to think about why you're doing it, what you're doing it for. And it's got to be the right breeds, and it's got to be done carefully. You just don't go, oh, we'll just throw this cow in with this, I mean, we got a crossbred. Well, yeah, you do, but have you got the right characteristics? So basically, when you're doing crossbreeding, what you're looking at is you should be looking at characteristics of the animals and how the heterosis is going to work, not any specific breed necessarily.
Yeah,
so that's what I would say.
Yeah. Again, a systems approach is really important for crossbreeding also.
Yeah, like are there specific traits you're looking at?
I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
What
All
else,
right.
Shannon?
I think that's all at the moment. Do you all have anything else to add? We're getting close to the end now. So
Well, we are actually, 2 minutes from the end.
2 minutes from the end, yes. So I didn't know if there was anything else.
Well, the only thing I have to say is that I think that your replacement rate is affected by your management. Your management is how you treat those cows. I hear a lot of people talk about roughing cows out and doing this and doing that and challenging
Hey,
the cows.
we got one more question.
We got one more question that did just come in.
Yes.
Sorry.
So, no, you're fine.
So why are we seeing more black cow, or why are we seeing more straight breds?
Straight black cow herds.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of that has to do with the Certified Angus program. I just, because they are able to, they've done a good job of marketing their breed, right? And it doesn't have to be an Angus. It can be a black animal that meets the requirements from the carcass standpoint. But that's why we're seeing that, is because they've got to be black to get that certification.
Randy, I believe that's part of the reason, but I think there might be some other factors to consider. Number 2 is that I think Herefords, a great breed, great historical breed, do have some problems with flies. They do have some problems with milk. They do have some in other words, I'm not saying they still exist in that breed, but I think that's what happened. And that's why fewer and fewer of them, because calf size was never a problem, obviously, but they did have problems and issues of growth and things because of the type of animal they are. And they're very hardy animals. And so they Angus kind of replaced them. But there's also the dehorning issue. I mean, there are a lot of reasons that we see Angus predominantly, and there's a lot of reasons, the black ones. There's also the social reasons that if you have a different colored cow and a different thing, and you don't really want to stick out in a neighborhood, you might feel a little intimidated, or you might feel like, and it's kind of like, do I have a Ford or a Chevy? Okay. People believe in Fords, people believe in Chevy. Are they wrong? No, nobody's wrong. It's just different. But I think that Angus have become popular, and for a lot of different reasons. And I think there are trends in popularity that affect what we have as well, not just, the fact that.
But go back to it. Market still has an effect, and if you can get higher dollars for your calves, people are going to look at that. And I understand why. Guess what cows I have in the background of my
I was going to say, I was just looking at your picture and thinking.
So the other thing is you've got a large herd of registered cattle that you can do a lot of selection differential on. There's a lot of Angus out there, so they can make a faster change in genetic change with that breed. And so that's benefited them also.
Well, the other thing too is there's a lot more sires to pick from, because there's a lot more sires. I mean, it kind of feeds on itself. But my point is, there's a lot of reasons that the animals are black. Will they stay black? I don't know. Are they going to turn red? Who knows? Give it 20 or 30 years, we might see something completely different. I mean, the number of European crosses and the number of European blood in the U.S. has increased, and it will probably continue to increase because of growthiness in the feedlots, and there's a bunch of other reasons. But we won't. So it's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer it completely, but that's what I believe.
I'm not sure we have the answers to it either, but that's some of the reasons we think. Anyway, I think we need to quit because it's 1:02, and I've got another.
Okay.
I need to go to another thing. So.
Okay. But
thank you very much for being here, guys.
Appreciate you staying on.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. A recording of the webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can also register for other upcoming webinars. As you close your Zoom window, you should see a brief survey pop up. We would really appreciate any feedback about today's webinar and any ideas for future webinars. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.